Humility. We often see pride in others as being self-absorbed and completely self-focused. And it's very easy to see pride in others, but it's difficult to see the pride in ourselves. Some of us may be familiar with the Narnia series and its author C.S. Lewis, and he explains pride like this. Pride leads to every other vice, wicked or sinful behavior. It is the complete anti-God state of mind, which means that pride is at the root of many sins and separates us from loving God because we put our own ego above others and God himself. Now, if you want to see pride, let's look at our old friend Haman. Now, as we've seen from the past sermons, Haman is a big deal in the palace of King Xerxes. He is second in command of the empire, and he loves the attention and the power from which his place holds. Now, Haman expects everyone to bow down to him, like everyone. And we see here that he becomes furious when Mordecai refused to bow down to him. It says, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. And I'm sure we've all had an encounter with somebody who seems to be so full of themselves, like so full of pride and believe themselves above all others, just for us to think of them to be like a jerk. But the issue is that no matter how bad we think of them, I can be just like that, and we can all be like that. Pride is a strong feeling, and it can make us all feel like we are so much better than others, like we're the main characters in a movie, but really we're all part of something much bigger. Now, I love sports. I mean, who doesn't? We might have a favorite sport like rugby or volleyball, or support our favorite teams, and that can fill us with pride. And we can take pride in our team, and their victories can give us the ultimate bragging rights. Like when we win the state of origin, let's go New South, we can play it off as a joke, but it doesn't actually take much for it to get out of hand. When we get our self-worth from something other than God, it always ends bad. See, Mordecai refuses to bow down to Haman. He's loyal to God and won't compromise his beliefs. We can think of Mordecai like Martin Luther King Jr., with his life threatened and the continuation of fighting for the freedom of his people, the African Americans. Just like Mordecai and the Jews, but he trusted in the Lord despite the oppression of Haman and violence threatened upon him. We see that Martin Luther King Jr. stands up for what he believes in and puts his faith in God even in the face of danger. And I think we all need to be a little like him more often. Continuing on, Haman becomes furious and decides to take revenge on Mordecai and the Jewish people. When pride takes over, it can lead to bad decisions and hurt feelings. Haman's pride blinds him to what is right. It says, if it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury. We can see here that Haman is so controlled with pride that it turns into anger. And Haman, thinking he was worthy of all the praise, thought that Mordecai had no right to do such a thing as defy his order. Like how the Israelites continuously turned up their noses and looked away from God and don't feel the need to ask God to help us. Now, where do we see pride in our lives? We can see pride at school, on the internet, in our friends, in public, and even in our church. We continuously act like we're better than other people. And I know I act like I'm better than other people more often than I should be. It isn't selfless, it's selfish, and it's sinful. From this, though, we can learn that pride blinds us, that pride that blinds us is sinful and can affect not only ourselves but those around us too. We all act as though we're better than others a lot of the time, so we need to be more like our God, a selfless, loving, and kind person. I have a story from primary school where I won the class award for being the most respectful student, and it filled me with so much pride, and I boasted like I won an Olympic medal. And I thought myself to be above everyone else, all my friends included. And now I know that it isn't too bad, but the consequences were very effective. My friends didn't like that I was so full of pride and that I saw myself to be better than them. And even though it didn't seem like much, the consequences were very effective. They really hurt. I could see that my friends didn't want to be around me, and most people turned away from me. And even though I have many more stories of pride messing things up, and I've only been around for 16 years, so you guys must have a lot more. Um, um, but just like me, and just like Haman, we're all sinful, and pride can be destructive when we place ourselves above everyone, including God. Just like we're saying that we're better than God, but we really aren't. And I encourage everyone to realize we aren't like God, and we need to be mindful of how we treat our friends, families, and even strangers when pride is in the chat. Pride can lead to many harmful things like loneliness and conflict, and can trap us in a place of darkness where sin surrounds us. And no one wants that, right? It's a trap set by Satan to keep us from others and God. I think I'm passing it back to Thomas.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name's Thomas Akert. I'm 15 years old, and I'm here today to discuss the power of humility. Continuing with the series on the book of Esther, humility can be a difficult topic to grasp, but I have found a key moral idea that is expressed in these verses. To start, let's look at a quote. C.S. Lewis says, "True humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less," which really relates to Esther and Mordecai's displays of humility, as we'll look into. But basically, humility doesn't mean putting yourself down. Often people think that's what being humble is all about, having low opinions on yourself. It's not true. God has gifted each of us with unique talents and abilities, and it is okay to recognize those strengths within ourselves. However, having humility means shifting your focus away from worrying about your own importance and being more aware of others. It makes me think of what's happening in my school, where the teachers are looking to elect members from each year level to be part of the Student Representative Council. In the past, I have applied, as new members are added each semester. However, I haven't been chosen any of those times. But I always get stuck on trying to appear more humble, a value they generally look for in representatives, while also telling them all about my achievements and such. I think what I've been able to find has helped me with this. Even when looking at C.S. Lewis's quote, I realize that I don't have to think about myself when telling them about my good qualities. I am simply telling them the facts that they want to know, and I can still focus on just making the team. What we'll also see in the book of Esther is how this type of attitude can really change the outcome of an event in your life for the better. There are two key actions I want to emphasize from chapter 2, verse 19 to 23, so let's read. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, but Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do, for she had continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. So this was right after Esther was made queen, and I found the phrasing of this very important. It says, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, outside, separated, but, it uses the word but, the new Queen Esther did as Mordecai told her, as she had followed his instructions growing up. This verse really expresses Esther's humble attitude toward her position, not thinking less of herself, she was the queen after all, but thinking of herself less. She simply trusted Mordecai, staying faithful to his commands like when she was younger, except now she was of such a higher status that she could have easily ignored Mordecai. Reading on in verse 21, during the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king. Giving credit to Mordecai, and when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were hanged on a gallows. All this was recorded in the book of Annals in the presence of the king. And Mordecai never brings it up again. Judging by how this works out in his favor in chapter 6, when the king rewards Mordecai after realizing his good deed, God must have been pleased with Mordecai. So we can safely say he doesn't brag about this. He also wasn't thinking about himself, forfeiting the opportunity to ask for honor or recognition or something like that. And he received nothing. This is the attitude I've been talking about. Despite being in exile from Jerusalem, he still has an awareness for other people around him, even if it's the king who has life so much easier. It simply wasn't taken into account. the fact that King Xerxes had a much better life than Mordecai wasn't relevant because it's not about Mordecai. It's about saving the life of another. Great. Now what? What was the point of doing these things? Well, to Mordecai and Esther, these humble mindsets and virtues are satisfying enough. But it all comes together in chapter 6. We can see God's power shine through here. That night, the king could not sleep, so he ordered the record of his reign to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. Now, this timing is perfect, because instead of Mordecai making it known that he had stopped an assassination attempt earlier, the king was able to find out at a better time, as at this point, Haman was so bold as to order the entirety of Susa to eradicate the Jews and take their plunder just because of Mordecai. And that's where I feel I would give up on trying, because after protecting the king and standing up for God in front of Haman back in chapter 3, he gets dishonored, more than dishonored. The king's treasured official orders your race to be eliminated. Man, just think about that. Wouldn't that hurt? Luckily, due to Mordecai's persistence, God is able to intervene at the best moment. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. You see, now the king can properly appreciate Mordecai's actions. In response, the king orders Haman to lead Mordecai in a robe around on a horse and shouts, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor," completely shifting everything around. God made it a point that Mordecai will be lifted due to his humility, humiliating Haman in the process. And I think that's another point to emphasize. Being humble allows God to let things happen at the right time. The right time for your good deeds to be known or take effect is never immediately, only God knows. Looking back at my example earlier, I said I applied for the council a few times, and I thought that I would make it, I thought I should make it, but after I was denied, I'll tell you, looking back, there were a lot of ways that I've improved since then. And those qualities weren't all evident in my application or even how I would have been seen around the school, like my productivity at home or how social I was. I was, however, praying to God, hesitantly, about how he knows more than me. So I lifted it up to God to make the right decision for me as to whether I get the spot in the council. And I think that me being humble and letting God decide is ultimately how I was able to make those realizations about how I could improve. What I've been able to learn from this is that sometimes God rewarding you for being humble isn't always lifting you up, per se. It could also be saving you from bad experiences that you may regret. Now, if I get to join the council this time, I can hopefully make a more meaningful impact than I would have, where now I would be truly honoring God. What I want all of you to take from this is that true honor comes from being humble and serving others. God sees what we do, even when others don't, and that's the beauty of God's plan and his timing. We shouldn't think of ourselves, because to be humble is to trust that our good actions matter to God, even if we don't get immediate rewards. That's why it's much better to be kind and serve others than push ourselves forward. What we've seen in the book of Esther is a demonstration of Matthew chapter 20, verse 16. So the last will be first, and the first will be last, where Haman and Mordecai, the first and the last, swap places, as well as Esther, who ends up being saved in the end. Spoilers. Now, I want all of you to think about how we can all be more humble. We can see in Mordecai's case, he was focused on just doing good and pleasing God. No kidding. Of course, we should think that way. But it's really easy to think about the honor and respect that helping others can give you, and most of the time, we set it as our main motivation. I encourage all of you to try and do small acts of kindness instead for each other, because God sees every act of kindness, big or small, and God is here for it. It takes strength to do big things without being prideful, so we should focus on doing small acts and see where God takes us. This is what leads to deeper relationships and connections with those around us, because you're being genuinely kind. It's being humble that reflects Christ's love for us. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you so much for giving us the book of Esther, where we can learn about just how powerful humility is. We thank you for working through us in wonderful ways when we dedicate our good deeds to serving you. Thank you for watching over us, bringing us back to reality when we're overly prideful, and lifting us up when we're humble. God, I pray over the church that has assembled here today. I pray that you watch over them and keep them on the humble path. That way, we can find true joy in you. I pray that you can turn the lives around of those who are prideful, so that we can live with who we really are, because we're all children of God, and we can't be content in power,